Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the channel. I'm Mormelo, and I am your host. And on this channel, we talk about all things related to making a living as a live musician. Now, when you're playing outdoors like I do a lot, it depends on the climate. I've played in really cold climates like Scandinavia and Alaska, and I've played in really, really hot climates like down here in South Florida and the Caribbean. There's always considerations with your gear when it comes to weather. First thing you always want to have is some type of sun protection. Sunglasses, a hat. I mean, you can probably tell I'm blue-eyed, kind of light hair. It's gotten darker these days, but very light-skinned. My relatives come from Scandinavia and the Celtic Irish, part Italian, but Northern Italian. You know, I burn. A hat is essential, as well as some type of protection. You're gonna want an umbrella. You're gonna want some kind of canopy to go over you, and put that in your contract. Wherever you play, you don't want to play out in the sun. And I don't care if it's in Wisconsin, I don't care if you're in Michigan or Florida or Mexico. You want some kind of sun protection, and likewise, you want some rain protection, because particularly down here in Florida, it does tend to rain a lot in the summer. So your gear has to be protected. And there's also some considerations when it comes to how you transport your gear out and what you have. I'll go over that with my gear because I have it set in a particular way so that if it starts to rain, the rain comes in pretty fast in Florida. It can come in 30 seconds. I can get that gear down and covered so it doesn't get destroyed. And I learned this over time from a lot of experience. But along with sun protection, you're gonna want a fan. Now, I use these Lasco blower fans successfully, and I think they're the best thing out there when you're in hot weather. You can also get little heaters if you're in a colder weather, which I've used, and I totally recommend them. You can stick them on little stools very close to you, kind of in front of you on the side so it doesn't obscure the crowd, or you can get blower heaters. Sometimes they have these heaters that have fans that blow. But in cold weather, you're definitely gonna want some type of a heater. I've found that depending on the humidity level where you're playing, I found that it's the temperature that you're comfortable playing at all has to do with how warm your hands can play. That in a humid environment like Florida, when you hit about 60, 62 in this kind of humidity, after about 20 minutes of playing, your hands go numb, they go cold. You can't move them right, you can't really play. Definitely 60 and below, I have a serious problem because I have some heat on my hands. And likewise, in warmer and places like Alaska that I've played, I've been fine to play down into the mid 50s without a heater blowing directly on my hands. But it's definitely a consideration, especially in this pandemic age now, the post-pandemic age now. I think a lot more gigs are gonna be going outside. So that's definitely something you have to keep in mind. When you play, what time of the year you play, you should always have some type of heating or some type of fan situation. I'll show you some options. Now, as far as blower fans go, I love these Lasco fans because this part of the fan, the blower, can be moved, can be rotated, so you can kind of get the angle you want. And believe me, they are very strong. They can't be beat. I actually have two of these, so one on each side of me for the summer, and that pretty much keeps me cool. All right, another thing that's going to be ultra important if you're in a warm environment, like a warm, humid environment, it's one of those sports cooling towels. They are worth their weight in gold. Get a couple of them. You just wet them down and you put them around you. I'm telling you, they cool you down. Or like I do, I bring a little cooler, ice in there, and I bring my drinks and stuff like that. I put my cooling towel in there and I pull it out when it's cold, because sometimes the heat index can be 110, 105, and I'm out there playing even with an umbrella on me. Also, you're gonna definitely want some sun protection for your skin. God, I use the strongest stuff there is. So keep that in mind. And I've said this before in other videos, I'll probably continue to say it, but hydration is ultra important. It's important for your vocal cords, it's important for your skin, and it's just ultra important when you're sweating out. You want to keep bringing it back in. Electrolytes are good, Gatorade, Powerade, that kind of stuff as well. I don't do sugar, but the Zero G is really good. At least drink one of those per gig if it's really hot out there, but keep hydrated. All right, when it comes to basic gear besides PA, cables. I tend to go through cables. 2 is 1, 1 is none. So I always have extra cables, extra guitar cables, extra mic cables. If you have speaker cables, extra speaker cables. Always have extras. Eventually, you're gonna need them. Have extra batteries. I've touched on this in your guitar case, in your kit. You want extra of everything. Extra strings, extra batteries. You know what I've lost before, believe it or not? I've lost the little end pins that go in your guitar that hold the strings in. If your guitar has pins in them, bring a couple extra pins as well. All right, once you're on the gig, let's talk about microphone etiquette. Now, it's really important, especially these days. This is not the 90s anymore, it's not the 80s, when I used to cuss at the entire crowd, throw beer bottles against the wall, smash it against the back of the wall. 80s hairband rock star behavior. It's not those days anymore, so you have to be PG on stage. You don't cuss, you don't berate the customers. Keep it positive, keep it upbeat, and if somebody's messing with you and they won't stop, don't jump off stage and hit them. Just stop playing and get management. I know how that sounds, but that's how you gotta roll nowadays. You gotta be ultra professional. Try to take care of the crowd, try to do as many requests as you can, smile, keep it positive, and play your tunes. Believe me when I tell you, any negativity that you put off is amplified 10 times in the crowd. So your etiquette on the microphone is very important. All right, let's talk about the appropriate songs. Let's talk about reading the crowd. It's an essential skill for a musician to have. If you're a band leader, or you're a solo acoustic guy or a solo guy or girl, you have to know how to read the crowd. And how you do that is experience, but you can also look at the age demographic of the crowd. If somebody's seems to be 40 years old and over, say Generation X, you know, you can play 70s, 80s, 90s, that's gonna be their heyday. Always ask for requests. You can gauge a crowd by the requests you get from that crowd, because every crowd is different, and you might think that you're playing the material that they want to hear, but the only way to really know is to ask. So I constantly engage the crowd and ask them what they want to hear and tell them I love to take requests. And also, that'll garner you some good tips as well. So if you see a crowd and it's mostly people that are your parents' age, if I see people that are gray and older, boomers maybe, you know, whatever you want to call them, 60s, 70s, maybe some 80s, that's their music, that's their heyday. And I guarantee you, I'm gonna mostly get requests for like Eagles, James Taylor, Beatles, Creedence, The Doors. So you have to know your crowd. It's ultra important. Another thing that's ultra important is volume. I mean, volume is so important, especially nowadays. People come out, they're eating, they're having drinks, they want to be able to talk. You're not going to be blaring your music so they can't speak, they can't sit at the table in front of you. Now, you can't be too quiet so that the table in front of you can have a loud conversation and then anybody behind them can't hear you. So it's a give and take situation, but you really have to get a handle on your volume. It's always better to be a little too quiet in the beginning, and you could develop a relationship with some of the staff, the management, or the bartenders. They'll kind of let you know. If you play a place long enough, you'll know the settings basically to have. But you want to be a little bit too quiet. It's always better to be too quiet than too loud. Trust me, I know some people, I even know some family members who consistently too loud, and it's lost them gigs before. I try never to be too loud. Also, when you're on stage, always thank the staff and remind the patrons to tip the staff and take care of them. You know, make little jokes, kind of involve the staff so that the customers feel like they have a rapport with them and they'll take care of them, they'll take care of you as well. And I've said this before, don't drink alcohol on stage while you're playing. I don't want to sound like a granny. I don't want to sound like I'm your parents, but it's just not professional nowadays. It's frowned upon, as well as smoking. Almost every establishment everywhere doesn't allow smoking. So back in the 80s, people smoked on stage. You put on the end of your guitar, you play, whatever. I've never smoked. Thank God. It just doesn't have a professional ring to it now. If you want upscale gigs that actually pay more than 50 bucks, then you want to appear as professional as you can. Again, like I said, you got to know your demographic. Who are you playing for? If you're playing for people in their 20 to 30 years old, 21 to early 30s, man, they're 90s, early 2000s, you're going to want to play material like that. You're going to want to play, you know, the 90s pop and grunge bands and the Pearl Jams and Nirvanas and Collective Soul and plus stuff like Nickelback, Bruno Mars. You're going to want to play new country, everything from Keith Urban, stuff, whatever the genre is that you play. You're going to want to understand the demographics of your audience. It's that simple. And the must-have songs are really dependent on your genre, also dependent upon the age, like I said. For me, the solo acoustic singer-songwriter thing, my bread and butter is Jimmy Buffett, Eagles, Zac Brown, CCR, Beatles, Jim Croce, James Taylor, all the way up to stuff like, you know, Keith Urban and songs like Tennessee Whiskey and Darius Rucker. I do a lot of 90s as well, a lot of 80s. Now let's talk about grooming. Nowadays, it's dress for success. You've seen my video where I play my resort gig, and I'm generally in a water wicking polo, some shorts that are kind of like water wicking, like golf attire. You just want to look like you fit in with the crowd, or even if you want to look a little bit more dressed up than the crowd, that's also good as well. It has to fit the climate. It has to fit the echelon, so to speak, of the type of place that you're playing, the vibe, but you don't want to look like a derelict on stage. Like I said, back in the day, you had to have a look. We had to have long hair back in the 80s, early 90s. We had to dress like a rock star. I made my own clothes, all studded out in leather and stuff. You couldn't get booked if you didn't look right. So the more professional you dress, the better it's going to be for your career, the more gigs you're going to have. If you look like a derelict, people aren't going to book you. Trust me, it doesn't matter how good you are. And then make sure your hair is brushed, make sure your teeth look good, you don't have bad breath, things like that. I know that sounds crazy and it probably sounds like I'm trying to be your parent, but it's important, man. Good grooming habits are ultra important if you want to be successful. All right, so marketing on the gig. The number one rule to marketing on a gig is always tell people when you're going to be there next. Give them your website, your social media, all that stuff that's pertinent. But you never market a gig at another establishment when you're playing a different gig. So I'm never going to go to my Friday gig and talk about my Saturday gig. It's not going to happen. I'll say something like, you can look at my calendar on my website and it'll show you everywhere I play, but you never promote another gig at another establishment over the microphone. It's uncouth. It's just not done. It's not cool. And believe me when I tell you, the management will not appreciate it. But you can promote other days and other artists and pretty much the entire calendar at the establishment that you are currently playing. That's totally cool. They will love you for that. Always have business cards. I have business cards always right in front of my tip jar. Now, these days, a good rule of thumb is to have your Venmo, maybe your Zelle, Cash App, right on your tip jar. Believe it or not, people out in the crowd, they don't carry money. They don't carry cash as much anymore. They'll Venmo you 10 bucks though, no problem. Cash App it to you. Also, something that lights up your tip jar, LED lighting in there, something that makes it stand out so people know there's tips. I have money taped, and it's a big glass kind of jar thing, and I have actual bills taped around it, so you can't miss it. So that's pretty much it. Your instrument, your PA, weather considerations, extra gear, habits on the microphone, gig etiquette, how to speak on a microphone, your song list 101, all those things. If you get it right and you look professional and you sound professional and you have decent gear, that will contribute to your success. Another thing to consider is once you do have a good PA and a decent mixing board, you really do need to understand the fundamentals of sound. I'm going to go into that a little bit here as well. You need to understand how to get a good sound, and a good reference is something like this. This shows you where the vocals are. That's the sweet spot. It's kind of where your fundamentals are, and those are frequencies: 60 hertz, 100, 200, 400, 600, 1K. That's kind of like, the middle. That's your mids. 2K, 4K, 6, 10. That's kind of your high, your sibilants, your air is 16 and 20K. This is what the human voice can really hear. This is vocal, percussion, brass, woodwinds, strings. And this basically shows you the frequencies that each of your instruments that you're going to use in a band: snare drum, toms, male voice, female voice. What you want to do is you want to trim out using a low pass filter, trim out everything below that and trim everything out higher than that. It depends on the actual person as far as what you need to do, but generally you don't need to mess with EQ too much if you have decent speakers and a good console. But you can download something like this, a chart that'll show you all the frequencies for the different instruments. This is useful in the studio. This is useful for live. You need to learn this. You learn where the bass guitar is, the standard piano, the frequencies, and look, it tells you here's your rumble, here's your chest thump, there's your bottom, boom, punch, warmth. But something like this is very useful, or something like this, which just shows you where in the frequencies, the fundamentals, and then the harmonics lie. But you might have some saxes, and there's your bass guitar, and there's your guitar and bass, piano. Basically, you want to trim out the frequencies you don't use. Anyway, that's about it for now. I'm Sean Mormelo. That's SeanMormelo.com. Thanks for being here. I'd appreciate if you hit the bell, subscribe, maybe hit the like button, and stick around. We got a lot more to come. I've got a lot of life experience to share with you guys. So thanks, and I'll see you soon. Bye.